Hey YouTube! Today we are going to look at modeling the TR-808 clap, which is just filtered white noise through a complex volume envelope. After that, we're going to make a more advanced clap by following the same recipe, but replacing the white noise with more interesting sound sources. Let's take a look. As usual, we'll start by looking at the TR-808 service manual, which has these nice block diagrams to show us what's going on in each circuit. So for this hand clap circuit, to the left, we have a trigger input, which causes these two envelopes to start generating. There's two different envelopes because the reverb tail and the clap transient are handled separately. Each envelope goes to its own VCA, or voltage controlled amplifier, to control the level. Now the input to the amplifier, if we were to follow this circuit backwards, goes to a white noise generator, which gets filtered, and then finally the level of the filtered white noise gets controlled by these VCAs. The real key to nailing the hand clap sound is to get the amplitude envelope set up correctly. But the circuits that generate these envelopes are surprisingly complex. As in an analog system, getting a capacitor to charge and discharge in this way takes a lot of components. But luckily, we don't even need to simulate this circuit because in the service manual, Roland gives us this timing diagram. So at the top, we can see the scale is that this will take roughly 30 milliseconds for this first section of the waveform, which we can see is the kind of amount of time until our last envelope trigger. So prior to that, there's, I guess in total, there's 4 envelope triggers, and just like roughly each of these envelopes will take about like 12 milliseconds, and then around the 30 millisecond mark, the final envelope will trigger, and the decay times look like they last, roughly 20 to 30 milliseconds as well. Okay, let's start building this patch. So of course we first need some noise, and I have the slope set all the way so that it's at white noise and the level boosted to 150%. And then we want to build that clap envelope, but this envelope isn't complex enough to make those types of shapes. So I'm just going to keep this envelope open the whole time and automate this gain knob. So there's 2 ways we can create that clap envelope shape, and I'm going to show you this first way is a little simpler, and most synths can do this, and then I'm going to show you a second way that only Phase Plant can do, and it can model analog characteristics better. So first, let's map this LFO to the gain. And then let's put in that clap shape. So we want I think we want 4 pulses, and the 4th pulse will start at 30 milliseconds, so we want this whole LFO to last about 50 milliseconds. So that looks good enough. And then to have this whole thing last around 50 milliseconds, I think we want like 20 to, let's put it at 15 hertz to start with. So we got to set this to not retrigger so that it only goes once. So that's great. That's essentially what the 808 clap transient should sound like. But one of the things is that, like an analog circuit, you're never going to get this exact LFO shape. And we can automate this LFO speed, but the way like an analog circuit would vary is not by kind of like shrinking or scaling up this LFO shape linearly. Really, every single envelope can have some variance. So the way I'm going to simulate that is by doing something a little closer to what the analog circuit does, and I'm going to set up an envelope that does 1 pulse of our clap, and then set up a retrigger so this envelope retriggers 4 times in 30 milliseconds. So this envelope should have a decay of around, let's say, 30 milliseconds, and it should have a pretty exponential decay. And one of those pulses would sound like this. And then to make it a clap sound, we need this to retrigger many times within 30 milliseconds. So let's set up an LFO to retrigger this. And I'm going to use a ramp because this trigger works that anytime the signal exceeds this threshold, it's going to re-trigger. So this amp, we want this every time this ramp to cross that threshold. We want that to happen basically once every like 10 to 15 milliseconds. So let's set this to the re-trigger, and then let's bring up the speed. So around 100 hertz, it will be at 10 milliseconds, which will give us about 4 pulses in 30 milliseconds. But then there's this problem that this doesn't stop re-triggering. So what we need to do is set a third envelope, which will be a 30 millisecond pulse. So we want the hold at, let's say, like 33 milliseconds, so we have time for that that fourth pulse to get in there. And no decay, no sustain. And we're going to control the ramp's amplitude so that after 30 milliseconds, this ramp will close and we will no longer re-trigger. Great, that's what I want. One extra trick in Phase Plant is to set this seamless mode to on, which will restart the envelope from the current value when triggered, which is closer to how a capacitor will behave. And then, like I said, the reason I like setting up the envelope re-trigger this way versus just an LFO with a hand-drawn shape is now we can add some chaos or some like analog modeling to this. Let's set up some random LFOs to, say, control this re-trigger speed. And one thing is this 100 hertz is the fastest rate. So let's actually put two... Let's cross the trigger threshold thrice. Cross the trigger threshold twice in one cycle, and then we can set this to 50 hertz instead as our normal value. And then when we control the LFO, we'll get something that sometimes has pulses a little faster and a little bit shorter. And we can set up another random LFO to control the decay and also the decay speed. I have resampled the clap as we have it right now, and you can see that we get 4 bursts of energy within 30 milliseconds as measured with the Ableton time axis. So this is the amplitude shape that we want for the clap transient. Next, let's add the reverb tail. And the 808 circuit doesn't actually have any reverb going on in the clap. It's just a sustain on the white noise, which acts like a reverb tail. So we're going to do this by adding actually a separate auxiliary group. And this is just kind of simulating the way the 808 circuit works with having 2 copies and 2 VCAs. You don't really need to do it this way. You could probably get this all into one amplitude envelope, but I'm going to set it up this way, and it'll give us more flexibility down the road to modulate the reverb tail or add different effects to the reverb tail. So let's set up a mix node. We're going to add the green plus button and set it to this equals button to bring a copy of the noise down here. And then we can use this amplitude envelope down here to get the reverb tail. So we want the sustain to 0. We could have some release. And then let's turn the gain down and then play with the decay. Nice. The last thing I want to do is just add some macros to this so that we can kind of have some control and tuning this. So let's add this decay knob to be able to boost this reverb decay to something long, and maybe start with something shorter. And then let's add a reverb level control over here. Great. And then the last thing I want to be able to control is this transient decay. I want to be able to control that with a knob. So let's set it up with something like this. Next, we need some filtered white noise to finish up our hand clap sound. So we'll take a look at the 808 filter circuit to see what's going on. And at first I wasn't going to simulate this circuit, because in the service notes it says that the hand clap has a bandpass filter resonant at 1 kilohertz, and I thought that might be enough to get a close sound. But I got a comment last week from Anti-Pattern saying that he wanted to see how we set up these frequency domain simulations in closer detail, I guess so he can run these type of simulations himself. So I will walk through how you actually set up these type of circuit simulations. And in the end, I'm really glad that Anti-Pattern suggested that, because this filter shape is really a lot more like a resonant high-pass filter than a bandpass filter. And when I put this into my synthesizer, the resonant high-pass has a lot more sizzle, faithful to the 808 circuit. So I think when Roland talks about bandpass, they really talk about these big resonant peaks, which kind of act like a bandpass over the frequencies of interest. But in reality, they're using something a lot more like a high pass so that we keep these high frequencies in the clap signal. So thanks, Anti-Pattern, for encouraging me to look at this circuit in more detail. So how we're going to set this up from scratch is, first off, we'd look at the hand clap circuit, which is really backwards just because they have to fit so much more stuff in to the schematic. But really we have white noise coming in up here. They have it marked WN, and the output of this filter is like, the output of this IC21 op amp. So we want to model all of these components in this signal path to see what's going on in the filter. Okay, so after you wire up this filter in your circuit simulator, what we want to do is see how this circuit behaves with different input frequencies to plot its frequency response. So this AC source is something that you would not have when you're just putting in the components that are in the schematic. This is something that we're putting in as part of our simulation. So you'd get this voltage source going to components and sources, or maybe it's just called voltage. You put this in, and then it's important for this simulation, you need to give this a value of AC1. So I've already done that, so I'm going to delete this. So we have a AC1 voltage source going in, and then what you'd want to do, if I were starting from scratch, I wouldn't have these parameters yet. We would want to go up here to run the simulation, and then we're going to say we want an AC analysis. And this doesn't really matter too much. It's kind of like the resolution. But I'm just going to choose octave since that makes sense for music. And we'll do 12 points per octave. So we simulate essentially each semitone. And then we'll start at 20 hertz and go up to 20 kilohertz to go through the audio range. And since I already had this simulation down here, the screen hasn't changed, but this has just reran the simulation down here. And you can see it is a resonant high pass filter, and the resonance is around 2 kilohertz. And if you're not sure how to read these logarithmic plots, these are making it a little bit easier since we need to see higher detail at lower frequencies than higher frequencies. It's spaced like this. It's equal spacing from like 100 hertz to 1 kilohertz as it is from 1 kilohertz to 10 kilohertz. But then these little notches are actually like the next, like in this case, 1,000. So this is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, so on. So this is resonant at around like 1.8 kilohertz. So after we add this filter to our hand clap sound, it'll start giving that character of the 808. And I'm going to use a nonlinear filter. I've been liking using this filter mode to simulate the 808 circuit. It seems to give a nice crunch to the sound. So I'm going to use this fuzzy filter mode, set the cutoff to around 1.8 kilohertz, give it a nice resonance, set the Q to around 6, and then turn the drive up as well. So you definitely have to tune all of these macros and some of these other controls to get a really crisp sounding clap. I've added an extra macro in for the pitch, which controls the cutoff of this filter. You have to dial that in. I also have added a macro which for the chaos, so we can have from a lot of randomness in the envelope generator down to just kind of a straight solid envelope each time. And yeah, like I said, like this is the patch I had been working on for this past week, and it took a lot of time to tune this in. I've added some extra filters to the reverb circuit just to kind of tame it. I've also added some stereo spread to the white noise. The 808 doesn't have that, but it's always a nice touch to have some stereo in your clap. And yeah, I will eventually package this up so you can match these parameter values exactly if you'd like. And I'll give this out in the future. But for now, yeah, just tune this by ear. Try and get it as close as you can. And it sounds like this. Now that we know how to make the 808 patch, let's take it one step further and make our own custom claps. So this is where learning to build things from scratch really pays off, because now that you know how to make the 808 sound, you can just slightly tune the recipe to come up with your own unique sounds that can sound, quite different and really give you a nice unique touch to your music. And we don't really need to change the clap envelope at all. That all works fine. We don't really need to change the filter envelope settings too much. We really just need to swap out this white noise source for something more interesting. So if I turn this group off, the kind of entire clap chain will be disabled, since I am only using this whole group to bring in an auxiliary signal. But if I bring this level up, we can see what this Foley sample sounds like on its own. So that's neat. But if we turn this gain back down and then patch this into our clap group via this auxiliary channel, we can now put it through the clap envelope and turn it into a percussive sound. So that on its own is already a really neat like glitch sample. But if we then blend back in the white noise, we can get this kind of glitchy clap sound. It sounds really nice. And I came up with 30 different clap sounds just by tweaking this over the past couple hours. It's really easy, but you can get your own really unique results. So I guess to close out this video, I'll just cycle through some of them and show you the range of sounds I've been making. So if you found this useful up to now, remember to give it a like. It really helps out the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, just follow along. So I'll see you next time.